that are mindful of gender realities. In relation to the values of equality, as enshrined in our constitution, South Africa has the following instruments at its disposal. The Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, Act 4 of 2000. This act recognizes the need to address systemic discrimination and specifically aims at the eradication of social and economic inequalities. It further speaks to the prohibition of unfair discrimination on the grounds of gender. The Beijing Declaration on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development emphasizes the empowerment of women and the realization of women and girls' human rights. It further asserts the need to end poverty, the eradication of hunger, and achieving full employment and decent work. This is particularly significant on the gender equality landscape today, as women continue to receive unequal pay in the marketplace and are expected to continue to accept the state of the gender pay gap, which continues to place their male counterparts at a high income rate. Fellow South Africans, honorable members, violence in all its forms is endemic to the South African society. Both sexual and domestic violence are pervasive, and all women live under the fencing violence. According to the United Nations, violence needs to address systemic rights violations in our world today and remains largely unreported due to the impunity, silent stigma, and shame surrounding it. Violence amongst women of reproductive age as cancer, and a greater cause of ill health than traffic accidents and malaria combined. In general terms, it manifests itself in physical, sexual, and psychological forms encompassing intimate partner violence, sexual violence and harassment, human trafficking, female genital mutilation, and child marriage. South Africa is a signatory to a number of international treaties to protect women's rights, and it's a strong legislative framework in place, which includes the Domestic Violence Act of 1998, the Sexual Offences Act of 2007, and the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Human Persons 2013 Act. Despite the treaties, policies, and legislative instruments in place, gender-based violence has cumulatively and significantly escalated over the years. Today, we have already developed the National Strategic Plan, as have been decided in the Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence. Law and Justice institution also plays a key role in the distribution of rights and resources in South Africa. The mainstreaming and institutionalization of a gender perspective in the justice system is an essential step toward recovering a feeling of trust and security and combating its perceived impunity. This mainstreaming entails an understanding of women's experiences within the justice system. There are still significant challenges in ensuring that women's rights are promoted and protected. Women continue to face a number of structural barriers to the realization of their human rights, which are either overlooked or are not adequately addressed in national laws, policies, and budgets. Women often experience secondary victimization when taking up issues such as gender-based violence within the criminal justice system. Despite the prevailing challenges, we must acknowledge that some key pieces of legislation have been passed, which include the Judicial Services Commission Act, South African Judicial Education Institute, etc., etc. The challenges of transformation permeates all areas of life in South Africa, and the legal profession and the judiciary are no exceptions. These realities have defined the law and the composition of the legal profession and ultimately the judiciary. Transformation of these institutions will enable the equitable enjoyment of a whole range of rights and resources, including gender bias and lack of sensitivity, lack of funding and capacitation, and patriarchy in the legal landscape. Patriarchy is not something that can be eradicated only by government, but it requires collective action. It needs all of us within society, particularly because it coexists with and survives even under the most progressive political systems, because it's articulated in many diverse, subtle and hidden or open and crude forms. It also persists because it is explained away in many logical sounding ways, ranging from the natural, biological to religious and cultural arguments. The core to women's inequality is the patriarchal societal ideology, which places women in a subordinate position in relation to men. An important practical manifestation of the patriarchal social ideology is women's limited access to economic empowerment. Given the complexity of the challenges faced by women, Parliament is also playing an important role in advancing the gender agenda in South Africa in an effort to give effect to a key resolution of the 2019 Women's Parliament. We are having the review sessions of the 1994 Women's Charter for Effective Equality. This charter provides both scope and context for the review of all existing policies, legislation passed, as well as programs in place, particularly as they pertain to the advancement of women's rights. We are indeed engaging districts across all provinces in an effort to ensure that women from all walks of life are able to participate in the review process. We have ensured that district-level review sessions in each province culminate in high-level discussions with the provincial government leadership so as to ensure that issues raised receive the necessary response. Thus far, we have found that the lack of gender mainstreaming and women empowerment as an approach has resulted in the perpetuation of gender inequality, while equity has been more about numbers rather than transformation through mainstreaming as a mechanism towards gender equality. We have found that gender indication and the collection of gender disaggregated information is limited. There is poor translation of the national agenda on women's empowerment and gender equality into local government programs. There is also grave absence of analysis of the gender impact of existing revenue and expenditure with little or no systems of gender responsive budgeting. Furthermore, the gender discourse is treated as an event that is only worth to be celebrated in August month. We want to call on provincial governments to ensure that the framing of their respective provincial growth and development strategies are underpinned by gender responsive planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluating, and gender audit approaches. It also indicates that the provinces and districts have been engaged thus far, have embraced the opportunity to work cohesively together with Parliament, the CGE, the FFC, and States SA to address the issues that have been raised. We are confident that our follow-up engagement will yield better findings. We have also found through our consultative process that there is an urgent need to review the National Gender Policy Framework of 2000 in order to improve its efficacy and impact. Also, South Africa's national gender machinery has been universally acknowledged to be a best practice. However, the lack of skills, resources, and an integrated coordination framework with clear lines of communication and accountability are likely to render the machinery ineffective. Fellow South Africans, honorable members, Nelson Mandela once said that freedom cannot be achieved unless women have been emancipated. Allow me to add that democracy is no democracy without gender equality. The women's question remains arguably the most unresolved in the history of democratic thought and practice in South Africa. Women were always participants in politics. It was only in moments of extraordinary mobilization by women themselves that advances were made in defining an agenda for a good and just society. The strongest legacy of mobilization of women in South Africa through the course of the 20th century was a political consensus that not only should women have a greater voice in decision making, but resources should be directed towards reducing the inequality that is rooted in economic and social structures. This consensus is embodied in the constitution of our country. To be sure, one part of this relates to parity in representation, full legal equality for all. Equality is espoused as a formal project of the state, a form of state-sponsored feminism, but its radical potential to enable women to be fully engaged citizens is undercut by its detachment from the complexities of power relations in society. In conclusion, Honorable House Chair, we need to provide leadership as an activist parliament in order to ensure that we advance and deepen gender equality. We need to sustain a solid oversight program of action with clear indicators and baseline data so as to facilitate the effective monitoring of the gender wage gap. The struggle for gender equality is a struggle for human freedom, and it is a constitutional imperative. The liberation of our country will remain incomplete until the total unconditional liberation of women is achieved. Let democracy reign and let women across the world be accommodated within the constitutional democracy. I thank you. Thank you very much. Malibongwe.
Malibongwe. Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you, Deputy Chair. The next speaker is Honorable Lapskafen, Democratic Alliance.
Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Minister, honorable members, fellow South Africans. Let me first start off by establishing the terms of reference for this debate. A general definition of democracy means a government by the people, a form of government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised directly by them or by their elected agents under a free and fair electoral system. History shows that countries where conflict was a part of the pre-democratic dispensation, due to systems where power of minorities were used to control others, such as slavery and apartheid, the impact thereof on the dignity of the total human being have deep-rooted feelings and perspectives of mistrust and hate. Therefore, guiding principles to negotiate or by or get to consensus needed to be agreed upon and accepted before a country could embark on drawing up a constitution underpinned by the values of a constitutional democracy. This was the process followed in our country. Our constitution was guided by 35 principles and subsequently certified and adopted as the supreme law of our country. What is further remarkable and worth noting is our ability as a nation to have done that ourselves, following decades of violence and oppression. Furthermore, constitutional principles can be regarded as either political obligations if they are agreed to by political elites prior to the constitutional process, such as done in Burundi and Cambodia, or they can be legally binding if they are put into the legal mandate or other legal framework for the constitutional process. Great examples of this include Bolivia, Kenya, Yemen, and South Africa. In a constitutional democracy, the authority of the majority is limited by legal and institutional means so that the rights of the individuals and minorities are respected. These included multi-party participatory democracy with regular elections and universal adult suffrage, supremacy of the Constitution over all other laws, a quasi-federal system in place of centralized government, non-racism and non-sexism, the protection of all universally accepted fundamental rights, freedoms, and civil liberties. The Constitution refers to the Republic of South Africa, thus defining South Africa as one sovereign democratic state, and lists the country's founding values as human dignity, the achievement of equality and the advancement of human rights and freedoms, non-racialism, non-sexism, supremacy of the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our Constitution includes a special category of socio-economic rights, such as housing, healthcare, food, water, social security, and education. However, not every however, not every citizen could or would immediately enjoy all these rights. The responsibility would then fall on the state to help realize these rights with what can be afforded and performed over time. Budget surplus secured by government's transparent socio-economic policies and practices should make the rollout of such programs addressing these broad socio-economic rights possible. Chair, sorry, can you please guide me 1 minute? There's external noise that I can't handle at the moment. Will you please allow?
Honorable Member, I don't know where this noise comes from. Is it from your side or?
That's from Honorable Chile.
What is happening now?
The table, I think, must assist me because now she's eating her time because I don't know the noise that she's talking about is coming from where.
Chair, it looks like she fell off her chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Honorable member.
Point of order, Chair.
Where was this noise comes from? Because now your time now is running. Meanwhile, we are fixing that noise.
Point of order, Chair. Honorable Brother said.
Yes, Honorable Mohai, the Chief Whip.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's unfortunate what happened to when Honorable Abuskakhin was still on the platform. I will request that she be allocated the necessary minutes she lost because of the disruption. That can be worked out, Chair, through the advice also of the table staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief Whip. Honorable Kitty, you can continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. Honorable Chairperson, we all agreed and accepted our constitution. In 1994, South Africa became a constitutional democracy. South Africa, with the ANC as the leading party, started building on freedom, addressing basic and socioeconomic rights and needs by starting to erase inequalities through sound economic policies and the implementation thereof. I'm only going to mention a few examples of implementing constitutional values. From 1996 to 2009, the number of formal dwellings increased from just under 6 million to over 10 million. Over the same period, the number of informal dwellings increased by only 400,000. In the first 10 to 12 years of the ANC government, 10 formal houses were constructed for every shack. Access to water and electricity improved in the same way during the same period. A process of redress through land reform started. We were the well-applauded and saluted Rainbow Nation and a true beacon of hope to the rest of the world. We were well on the way to fully realizing the values and intentions that our Constitution envisaged. Unfortunately, Chairperson, in 2020, this picture is only a vague memory. I ask myself, why is it so important for the ANC to debate the reaffirming of the principles and values of South African constitutional democracy? The analogy of renewing wedding vows, as being done in some cultures, seems relevant to me. Interestingly, wedding vows or promises are often renewed due to a process of crisis, loss of trust, hardships, and pain of a failing relationship to symbolize a new beginning. The ANC at this moment is in dire need of a new beginning, as death is inevitable. Let us start with the Chapter 9 independent state institutions that exist for the purpose of supporting and strengthening constitutional democracy. The Public Protector's Office has lately been embroiled in one court case after another, a pillar of despair, political interference, and corruption. The Human Rights Commission got international attention for biased statements before investigating a matter arising from the Rugby World Cup series. Their communication on focus on specific issues in recent weeks have also been inconsistent with their mandate. The Auditor General report year on year fruitless and wasteful expenditure, unauthorized expenditure worth millions, as well as the lack of political will and leadership, with little or no improvement. The Commission for Gender Equality deserves a debate on its own in the NCOP. More alarming issues are the rising unemployment rate, a 440% increased violent protests rate, the country falling back to position 84 in 2019 from 35 in 2010 in the ranking of ease to do business, failing and bankrupt state-owned enterprises, financially raped by corruption and state capture, with the biggest culprits being Eskom, SAA, and Denel, and a whole lot more. Stats South Africa report in 2019 shows that the gap between poor and rich has widened, primarily because of the growth of the black middle class. The truth of the matter is, black on black inequality is growing. South Africa is one of the most, if not the most, unequal country in the world. Furthermore, the judicial system as one of checks and balances, but has been in the judicial system is one that should have been of checks and balances, but has been ineffective in some more important instances. As far back as 2013, a study of the Council of Human Science Research titled Constitutional Democracy in South Africa, Fanciful Ideal or Tangible Reality, found that the political system has not yet internalized the responsibility of public representatives to account for their actions and performance. They further concluded that the NPA has been at the center of public life and debate for more than half of South Africa's 2 decades of democracy. The National Prosecuting Authority itself and its independent component units, the Directorate of Special Operations, or Scorpions, and the Assets Forfeiture Unit for many years led a high-profile fight against organized and white-collar crime that began to include in its nets senior political figures. An independent NPA that prosecutes without fear, favor, and prejudice signals that no one is above the law. It also helps bolster respect for the law and indirectly instill trust in the Constitution and the institutions it creates, including the judiciary. Honorable Chairperson, 7 years later, the Scorpions are scrapped and almost no evidence of convictions of senior political figures. The people of South Africa want to know what is going on. The recently concluded Local Government Week of the NCOP summarized the extent and impact that poor governance and financial management, lack of political leadership, and the extent of corruption has an alarming number of municipalities, as underscored by the Auditor General's report. More than 45 municipalities needed interventions during the 5th Parliament. The impact is felt by the people of South Africa, the rich, middle class, and poor, but most of all, those the most vulnerable and those dependent on the state for grants. Honorable Chairperson, normal crises expose our vulnerabilities, and in 2020, so did the COVID-19 pandemic. The ANC government has not secured a surplus budget for many years. The policy that state expenditure must be central to economic policy destroyed that ability. Our pre-COVID-19 economic recession, coupled with an incapable state, due to issues as I've already mentioned, were the main drivers of the ANC's many failures in the balancing act of protecting human life and livelihoods. A destroyed economy is a serious problem. But to utilize
Honorable Member, your time is over.
a few elite and political connected people through entrepreneurship is the certain proof that the ANC is not upholding the values of constitutional democracy. Chairperson, I couldn't hear you.
Your time is over, Honorable Member. The next speaker, your time is over.
Did I have my full 10?
Honorable,
You have spoken for a very long time.
Your time is over. I did 8 minutes for you. I would like to continue with our debate and call the Honorable M.O. Mokause, Economic Freedom Fighters. Over to you, Honorable Member Mokause.
Thank you, House Chairperson. House Chair, we need to ask ourselves difficult questions in this era. What is the meaning of democracy to a country like South Africa, lauded for its model constitution, yet still trapped in the colonial division of labor as supplier of commodities to colonizer nations? What is the meaning of democracy, House Chair, to the ordinary South African, sidelined to the margins of the economy, only fit to play a subservient role in relations to white people who own and control the means of production? House Chair, I know for a fact that as the EFF, We speak for most South Africans when we say that we have lost faith in government's ability to lead this country in such a way that ordinary South African can meaningfully gain from the fruits of a democratic dispensation. House Chairperson, 26 years of democracy have failed to bring about significant change to the lives of the people of South Africa. Honorable Minister, it is not 24 years, it is full 26 years that our people are suffering under your government. Instead, we are more divided than before. And the facade of the Rainbow Nation has all but dissipated with the territorial reigns that have been ruled for ANC for almost 3 decades. Even the New Dawn itself, House Chairperson, small screen meant to restore hope for our people, have failed to hide the deep-rooted structural, socio-economic, and racial inequalities among South Africans. Ordinary South African citizens have lost hope in the ability of democracy to respond to the social and economic needs of our people. House Chairperson, against a backdrop of decades of inequality and neglect, where we are now in stark contrast to where we thought we would be, and it seems that with each passing year, we descend deeper and deeper into an abyss of hopelessness, delusionness, and frustration, marked by service delivery protests, violent crimes, and corruption. This is evident by the declining participation in voting with every passing local and national elections. House Chairperson, of those South Africans eligible to vote, about 49% voted in 2019 elections. It is no secret that low voter turnout weakens democracy, and growing delusionness has a big role to play. Our people are led by government that is so far removed from their daily lives experience that they fail to deliver on their constitutional mandate to provide a better life for South Africans like they promised them. Dignity is a foreign concept in relation to the life of ordinary poor South Africans. Without access to the most basic services such as water, electricity, and sanitation, House Chair, South Africans has become a textbook example of a country in crisis. That many have come to view election as a mere opportunity for enrichment of politicians, undermining democracy. House Chairperson, instead of legitimate voter education and participation, our people are reduced to selling votes for free t-shirts and food parcels. The participation of big business in this country's politics also hugely undermine the central tenets of democracy. Their ability to buy votes from the level of political parties to national elections means that those with deeper pockets can manipulate democratic process to install the leaders they want, who will then lead, not for the people, but for those who paid for them to be in the positions of power. House Chair, the case of President Cyril Ramaphosa is a very good example of this practice. We now know all that big businesses, white people invested billions of rands to have him as a state president. His conduct since he became president shows that he owes his loyalty more to white people and big businesses than to ordinary people of this country. Through the money made available to him, he has captured all critical sectors of the nation, journalists, the criminal justice system, and even churches danced to his tune recently. But it is not him who sets the tune. It is those who paid for him, white people and big businesses. Those who invested in him now have undisturbed access to the state resources. They control all state-owned enterprises They control the policy discourse. They are in charge of government procurement here in South Africa. House Chairperson, 26 years of democracy has meant very little to the man on the streets. Black people have remained a nation of the poor, unemployed, homeless, and landless. Robust social movements led by South African youth have shown that the youth of the country is interested in safeguarding and further entrenching the democratic advancement of the liberation struggle. However, Chair, the high rates of unemployment, social and economic struggles, corruption, and the widening gap between the needs of the people and the actions of our aging leaders leave much to be desired as far as citizen participation is concerned. Chair, we need to recenter people as a primary agent of democracy. I thank you.
Well said,
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker is Honorable M. Gillion, African National Congress. Honorable Gillion.
Honorable Chairperson of the NCOP, Minister Lamola, Chief Whip of the NCOP, delegates and special delegates to the NCOP, honorable members, fellow South Africans. Allow me first to convey my condolences to the families of all victims of gender-based violence in our country. The vision of the Freedom Charter is to create a South Africa which belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Belonging is not by the mere basis of citizenship, but when all our people live in brotherhood, enjoying equal rights and opportunities. The democratic breakthrough represents a fundamental shift in the politics of South Africa. It represents a transition from colonialism that was founded by injustice and inequality, but a future of pursuing justice and equality. The Constitution of South Africa encapsulates the vision of the Freedom Charter in its preamble to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. This will be achieved when we improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person. Honorable House Chair, 26 years into our democracy, we should access the progress made in realizing the aspirations of all the people of South Africa. The African National Congress seeks to create a system that places the needs of the poor and social aspects of health and education for all. The creation of a national democratic society will be realized when our process of social transformation addresses inequality in our country. The fact that inequality continues to grow in our country represents a drift from the founding provisions of the Constitution to achieve equality. Deputy Chair, the high level of unemployment and poverty in our country requires a government that places the needs of the poor and the marginalized in the center of its initiatives. Access to basic services and human needs of health and education is important to eliminate poverty and provide sustainable livelihoods. Our people should have the capacity to be their own liberators using organs of people's power to drive social change. Human dignity for all and Ubuntu is the core of the value system we should create. A society with moral values of human compassion and solidarity. The value system entrenched by colonialism of division and polarization continues to manifest today in various aspects of our social and economic life. The skewed ownership patterns continue to reflect colonial patterns. Access to quality health and education remains skewed despite substantial progress in increasing access. Our society largely remains patriarchal, with increasing levels of gender-based violence and persisting gender inequality. Honorable House Chair, education plays an important socio-economic role in the life of a nation and the citizens. The constitutional right to basic education and further education are a critical milestone of the democratic government. Increased access to education contributes in entrenching the Freedom Charter's vision to teach the youth to love their people and their culture, honors human brotherhood, liberty, and peace. These principles reflect the vision of humanness, of the human spirit in a democratic state. Education has the ability to free the potential of each person as envisaged in the preamble of the Constitution. Education enables people to have access to opportunities to contribute to the collective good of all. We should acknowledge the significant progress made in expanding access to education. The increase of the middle class in South Africa is also a result of access to education. The breaking of the poverty cycle of many households will be realized through education. Higher education and further training play a pivotal role in developing the skills of all South Africans to play a leading role in the economy of the country. The transformation of our economy will only be enabled when the previously disadvantaged acquire the necessary professional and technical skills to meaningfully participate in the economy. The historic relations of the oppressor as a producer and the oppressed as consumers should be fundamentally changed. This pattern continues in our democratic society, and its persistence will continue to entrench racialized inequality. A truly transformed South Africa will be achieved when all its people have the opportunity to pursue and realize their goals without being discriminated on because of race, class, and gender. The two worlds in our health system, with a private health sector that serves a few and public service that serves the majority, entrenches unequal access. The right to have access to healthcare is also impacted by the capacity and infrastructure of public healthcare, as it is not sufficient to serve all the people. The introduction of the NHI seeks to resolve this unequal healthcare system, guided by the principle of creating a society with a single quality healthcare for all that restores the dignity of all. A caring society ensures a good well-being of its people despite their class. The HIV and AIDS support and other health support has demonstrated the significance of access to healthcare for all, as it increased the life expectancy rate of South Africans, excuse me, which is currently at 62.5 years for males and 68.5 years for females. The national health insurance, when fully implemented, will ensure the well-being of all South Africans. The creation of a united and democratic South Africa will be realized when the human dignity of everyone is respected and protected. Colonialism and apartheid were anchored through entrenching division amongst the dignity sorry, Chairperson, amongst the people because of race and ethnicity. The racial divisions of the past continues to manifest in our society, undermining the vision of a united people. South Africa's strength is in building a cohesive society should lie in its ability to undo the legacy of colonialism. The creation of a non-racial society as enshrined in the Constitution is not a minimal objective of social transformation, but a key feature of creating a united and prosperous nation where all people are treated equally without discrimination because of their race, class, gender, religion, ethnicity, and all distinct features of our diverse nation. Unity in diversity is an aspiration that underpins our constitutional democracy. Through the unity of all South Africans, our people will embrace the values and ethos of a value system of human solidarity. For as long as the majority of Africans and Blacks in general continue to live in conditions synonymous to poverty and living in informal settlements, our nationhood will falter. The ongoing parliamentary process to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow expropriation of land without compensation is a mechanism to expedite the process of social transformation to enable the majority of South Africans who have been excluded from economic activity and ownership of the land. Land is a critical asset to sustain livelihoods and to restore the dignity of Africans and Blacks who have no access to land for socio-economic reproduction. In conclusion, House Chairperson, South Africa has one highest level of inequality in the world with a Gini coefficient of 0.65 and a concentration of income with 20% of the population holding 68% of income and the bottom 40% of the population receiving only 7% of income. This reality should embolden us to continue to redress the injustices of the past. The African National Congress is committed to steering the nation to a path that respects, promotes the rights in the Bill of Rights. The political economy of the country should be transformed for the livelihoods of all. A better life for all, as espoused by the Freedom Charter and the Constitution, can be realized when all South Africans live by the principles and the values of our Constitution. I thank you, Chairperson.
Yeah, clear.
Thank you, Honorable Member. We are continuing with our debate. The next speaker is Honorable B. Sithole Moloi, KwaZulu-Natal MEC for Agriculture and Rural Development. Over to you, MEC. Honorable B. Sithole Moloi.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Greetings to the Chairperson of the NCOP, Honorable Masondo. Greetings to the Deputy Chair, Honorable Lucas, the Ministers present and Deputy Ministers, members of the NCOP and representative of province and local government. Your good self, Honorable House Chair. I also greet you, distinguished guests and civil society that is listening and partaking in this debate. I have a pleasure also to say that I am also in line with the minister when he was sending condolences to the advocate George Bezos as we lost the giants and the legal minds of our country. We lower our banners to say that we will always remember them for the good work that they have done and the contribution that they have made to craft such a wonderful and a very progressive constitution of our country. We really
want to say to the family, we thank them for offering us this giant, and also to say we are with them in prayers all the time. I have the pleasure to address this House, Honorable House Chair, today on an important subject that goes to the heart of our existence as the people of this country. Democracy is the heartbeat of this young nation, whose people spent centuries fighting with everything they had, so that one day they can taste the sweet fruits of living in a democratic country, a country where freedom reigns supreme. We gather today to deliberate on this important theme, International Day, Democracy Day, in reaffirming the values and principles of our constitutional democracy. The reason why we have this day to celebrate is because we are celebrating that we have attained our democracy and we have a constitutional democracy. Beyond that, we are also reminding each other and reminding ourselves on the responsibility and the challenges that the country is facing. We do this against the backdrop of the devastating global pandemic, which is COVID-19, that has wrecked the people's lives and also the economy of the world. We continue to offer prayers and messages of hope to the rest of the country that God will have mercy on the people that have lost their loved ones, and also on those that are still struggling to survive, who are affected. And we pray that God made us as a country to survive and go beyond this period. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude also to the African National Congress for having granted me this opportunity to be here and partake in this debate. I'm humbled by the opportunity made by my party and my organization, and also the contribution that we are going to make in this. Let me start by saying South Africa, our democracy was attained through suffering and brutal killings, which we observed in a number of years through the struggles of our country. We safe to say that will indicate that some of those people, and as we are in September, we remember people such as Andrew Zondo, who was hanged on the 9th of September. We are also remembering the human rights, as it's relevant for this debate, human rights lawyer Umama Victoria Mxenge, who was also brutally killed on the 5th of August in 1985. These are the sacrifices that we are looking at, and we draw back our strength when we are talking to this day and celebrating the democratic democracy, and also the gains that we have made up to this far. We should not forget all those heroes and heroines that have lost their lives during the struggle against apartheid. Honorable House Chair, today we debates reminds me of Dr. Kuma, the president of the African National Congress, who once said, I quote, "We deserve them to realize once for all that a just and a permanent peace will be possible only if the claims of all classes, colors, and race for sharing and for full participation in the educational, political, economic activities are granted and recognized. As African leaders, we are not so foolish as to believe that because we have made these declarations, that our government will grant us our claims for the mere asking. We realize that the this is only a beginning of a long struggle entailing great sacrifices of time, means, and even life itself. For the African people, the declaration is a challenge to organize and unite themselves under the mass liberation movement, and that is the African National Congress. I close quote. It is such background that South Africans, we should be proud of the freedom we enjoy today, but we owe it to them and the generations and the founders of this liberation movement who has made us who we are today, and the history that have changed during the time when we started to be led in a democratic dispensation, which was led by our former late President Nelson Mandela. They taught us about the importance of safeguarding democracy. Today, many of the demands of the people recorded in the Freedom Charter has been realized even though that we have not achieved all of them as expected, but we still continuing to forge ahead so that we achieve all of them. Most important amongst these is the assertion of the people shall govern, and that no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people. The constitutional democracy, which is based on the simple principle of government of the people, by the people, for the people, recognizes the Constitution as the supreme law. This requires the belief in the rule of law, which dictates that all people are equal before the law and nobody is above the law, regardless of their status. This therefore finds expression in chapter 2 of our Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, that clearly states what is expected and how we are looking forward in ensuring that these laws are attained and also are protected. The main pillar of the constitutional democracy is, amongst other things, an equality before the law. A House Chair, it is by no mistake that our Constitution recognizes this role of law as the supreme law of land. Furthermore, South African democratic architecture introduced another important element in our Constitution, which is the Chapter 9 institution, that these institutions were created for a good purpose, that is to safeguard our Constitution, at the same time emphasize on accountability, because a democracy without such is as the same as authoritarian democracy. So the breakthrough of 1994 in our country symbolizes the freedom, but it demanded that South Africans should now learn about challenges of democracy. When the then Deputy President, but now is our current His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, addressed the NCOP in 2015, this is what he said, I quote, "Since 1994, we have remade our country, we have refashioned the institutions of state, ensuring that the views of our people are heard, understood, and effectively represented. Our democracy is anchored on the understanding that the state is an instrument through which the people of our country may pursue their shared views. We want every South African to be an active participant in our democratic dispensation. We want to create a nation of citizens that care for each other, respect one another, and share a deep love for their country. We want a nation that is proud of its heritage, its symbols, its flags, and its diversity. We want a nation that understands its past, celebrates its present, and enthusiastically and actively build its future. Parliament is central to this effort." I close quote. As the leader of society, the African National Congress has done so much to ensure that people shall govern and all nation groups shall have equal rights. We have to put in place, the ANC-led government has put in place mechanism to ensure that all shall be equal before the law and all shall enjoy the equal rights. I understand that some people are claiming that they know better and they want to demean what the ANC has been doing. This government that is led by the ANC has made all efforts to ensure that participation of our communities, giving the chance to those that have been disadvantaged previously, is done and is entrusted in the laws of our country. It is incumbent upon us that we protect this long-fought democracy by ensuring that the rules is observed and our government is cleaned to the core. We ought to work hard, celebrate the fruits of democracy, because we have conquered the narrative of dividing rule in this country. Accordingly, as the representatives of the peoples will in Parliament, it is expected by democrats that we shall represent the views of the people, and as such, we ought to protect civil rights and freedoms of the people.
Conclude, Honourable Member, your time is finished.
I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is Honourable B. The next speaker is Honourable A.B. Klute, Freedom Front Plus. Honourable Klute.
Thank you, Chairperson. all men and women are created equal. This is the most fundamental point of departure from which a democratic society is built upon. It's the most important social contract we have developed. It is rooted in our deep knowledge and experience that we actually live in an unequal world for many reasons, not only economic reasons, and that we should at least act as if we are created equally. Ultimately, we created systems in our legislatures and courts where our equality is protected. We thus have freedom in our democracy. The question should be, do we? Chair, maybe our democracy has come at a price. The price of focusing only on freedom. Freedom without responsibility. That's the one thing that government has not reaffirmed. As the psychiatrist and philosopher Viktor Frankl said, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsible or responsibleness. En voorsitter, ek is baie bekommerd, want ek het nog baie min vandag gehoor oor verantwoordelikheid en 'n verantwoordelike staat. Chair, we need to attend to the one thing that our democracy should also value, a responsible state. And how is a responsible state created? Well, it's through our leaders. Chair, if our leaders do not act in a manner in which our freedoms are protected through responsibility, we are predestined to chaos we cannot afford. If our leaders have become so arrogant about their own freedoms, then we are creating a generation of poor people, economically poor and spiritually poor. For example, Chair, if this country's leadership abuses what they regard as freedom and use military airplanes to transport AC party members to Zimbabwe for party political matters, it is nothing less than blatant abuse. That's not democracy. If our country's leaders have looted the state and effectively the money of taxpayers, then indeed South Africa might as well become a failed state by 2030, as predicted by economic strategists such as Claude Kazak and reported by Al Jazeera just the past week. That's not democracy. If our leaders fail to create a society with opportunities through economic growth in a free market society, then those leaders have failed the people. If some leaders encourages bigotry, racial tension, and violence, South Africa will ultimately end up as a tribalist state. That's not democracy. If a political leader says, if they want war, give it to them, and it results in acts of looting, arson, and vandalism, that leadership is nothing less than a thuggery. That's not a democracy. And Chairperson, thuggery disguised as social justice has brought out the worst possible human nature can offer throughout history. Nazism as well as communism has taught us this. Even more recently, in our somewhat forgotten history, we know how thuggery in prison camps as Camp 32 at Osho abused human rights. Chairs are
It looks like Honorable Tute got a problem.
Chair, can I continue?
Yes, sir.
As I conclude, the stakes are high. Leaders do not
it's on its way. Honorable Tute is reconnecting. If you could just stop the clock, please.
Am I connected?
Yes, Honorable Clute, you
Thank
are
you.
connected. Can you
I will
continue?
maybe especially the ANC and the EFF should start acting as responsible leaders. Their freedoms should not just be another word for the rest to have nothing to lose. That's not democracy. That's a new tyranny. I thank you.
Chairperson,
on a point, Honorable Clute.
On a point of order,
No, I didn't recognize you. I didn't recognize you. Honorable members, I would like to ask Honorable member, please, order.
But it is within my right.
Honorable member, I didn't recognize you. Please,
Chairperson, is within my right as a member.
Your speech, no one to step you, please. Can you please allow other people to talk?
I'm rising on a point of
I didn't
order.
recognize you. You are speaking, but I didn't recognize you.
You must start recognizing.
I didn't recognize you, and there was no hands that was raised. Can you please,
Chairperson, you are infringing on my right as a member of this council by not allowing me to rise on any point. It is
honorable member, didn't recognize you, please.
Undemocratic.
Honorable member, I'll ask
the host. Let the host mute her.
Honorable member, can we continue? Can the host assist me?
We muted you.
Can we get a chairperson, please?
Honorable member, I would like to continue by call the Honorable Mokause to hear what she is saying, because she was just speaking without recognized by me. Honorable Mokause, can you please raise what you wanted to raise? Thank you.
Chairperson, let me start by reminding you that as a member of this council, when I rise on a point of order, I deserve to be heard. I deserve to be given a chance, not treated like I don't belong to this council. Chairperson, I was calling a point of order to Honorable Klute. Honorable Klute must know that the EFF is not in government yet. And when we take over power, we are going.
That's not a point of order.
What is the point of order?
You can now take over the chairmanship of the council, Chairperson. I'm done speaking.
Yes, Advocate Pindela.
You may proceed with the
Can I speak?
Yes, sir.
Advocate?
Yes, you
Can
may
I
proceed.
Okay, thanks, Advocate. The next speaker is Honorable S.M. Muchadi Lipompo, Deputy Chief Whip. Over to you, Honorable Muchadi.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Chair, the Chairperson of the NCOP, the Chief Whip of the NCOP, members of the NCOP, honorable members who are attending the debate. I salute you all. Let me take this opportunity to bow as I respect one of our own who has passed on, a man who has been able to be part of crafting our constitution. I would like to take the moment to honor him for a true internationalist and a true Democrat, Advocate George Bizos. Advocate George Bizos being a member or a person who came with parents in South Africa from Greece. Bizos was a Greek South African, and he has been a human rights lawyer who campaigned against apartheid in South Africa, and he remained faithful. He would have lived like any other person who had the privilege
but he knew that he is a person, he is a human being. He came and he intervened. He has been there to take over and even fight for the rights of our Rivonian trials. Comrade Bissos has shown that the color of his skin never determined for him to neglect Black in general and those who are marginalized in the country. He has shown to us that he has developed that love. To me, I associate him with Moses. When Moses in the Bible was in Egypt, even though he was in Pharaoh in the royal crown, he remembered that he is temporary there and he stood up with the Israelites. Bissos has been man who never sold his soul to marginalize Black people. He has been there for Black people and he has been very vocal to fight the apartheid. Bissos, who experienced the hardship and brutality of Nazi occupation in his birth country of Greece, went on to fight any form of repression as illustrated by how he threw his lot with the oppressed majority in South Africa for more than 6 decades. He is an internationalist. He's the founding principle of the ANC and guiding light to our democracy. Our remain in the world. It is founded on the respect for human rights and promotion of freedom and equality. Our policies are meant to translate this into a better life for all, not for individuals or for few people. Honorable Deputy Chair, the Constitution of South Africa, it has been the best constitution in the world. And I want to allude on the issue of religion, where the religious sectors were oppressed and were not given the opportunity to practice their religion in their own country. So our Constitution has outlined clearly that we are providing freedom of religion and belief and prohibit discrimination on the basis of religion. And the government does not require religious groups to register. However, the registered groups receive tax exemption. So the Constitution of South Africa has given us a latitude to be free in our own country and to live in freedom and to live with all people of different race. As we are celebrating this giant constitution, which is leading and guiding, which is changing the complexion of the lives of the people, I would like to say we are celebrating this day together as is coincide with the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The day is also an opportunity to highlight the values of freedom and respect for human rights as essential elements of democracy. Honorable Deputy Chair of NCOP, I would like us to say we touch base with the pandemic coronavirus which we are facing at this moment. In these difficult times of COVID-19, it remains important to highlight matters of human rights and freedom, not merely in our talk, but in our action as well. Because most of us, we go out when we need votes as political parties. We listen, or we don't give those action after we have been elected. This epidemic has done much to highlight the differences between those who have access better resources and those who do not have. More so in matters of access to health and better living conditions. I would like to emphasize that our Constitution, when it said it emphasizes on better life for all and the health. Our country, where we are in the rural area, we have seen that the freedom has been disseminated and service delivery of clinics, which are there in the communities to serve the people who are voting us into power. The difficulty of COVID-19 has brought us into a place where we lost majority of the people, especially healthcare workers, people who are sacrificing their lives as the essential service givers. I want to take this moment and convey my condolences to the nurses, doctors, and also the cleaners in the hospitals who have been there to take care for our beloved who are suffering from COVID-19. I would like to say we as African National Congress in government, we are taking note of each and every activity, and we are consistent saying all those who mismanaged the COVID funds and resources by officials must be met with the disdain that it deserves, and swift correction action will be taken. Honorable Chair, when we look at democracy and internationalism, inequality and limited access to resources have the ability to threaten even the world's oldest democracies. The recent development in the United States of America and other Western countries in movements such as Black Lives Matter have shown that true democracy must not only exist on paper, it must be not written in black and white and people shine about it. It must be practical. We cannot allow ourselves as human beings or humankind made in the image of God to be treated like animals. So I want to re-emphasize that the life of a black person is a life like any other life of any person living on earth. In Africa and the developing world, freedom, equality, these remain hollow words if they are not matched by realities on the ground. There can be no real freedom if people still have poor access of health. And I said we have met that. There can be no real freedom if access to quality education is determined by the depth of the pockets of the people. The depth of democracy in our neighboring countries talks to the quality of our democracy as well. And as we know, since we receive our democracy, since the dawn of democracy in South Africa, we have seen that many sisters countries have been here with us, and we have been there.
Honorable member, your time is expired.
Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Yes. The next speaker is Honorable S.J. Mohai, African National Congress.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chairperson, Honorable Minister Lamola, Minister of Justice, distinguished special delegates, and honorable members. Our debate on this important topic of democracy and the Constitution takes place in the second week of the Heritage Month, which enjoins South Africans united in diversity, the rich collective heritage and shared destiny. This debate also coincides with the 43rd anniversary of the brutal murder of one of the finest sons of Africa, Steve Bantu Biko, in the hands of apartheid security forces on the 12th of September 1977. This was hardly 15 months after the mass murder of peaceful and unarmed students who were protesting against racist policy of using apartheid operation language of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in schools. This heinous and inhuman act by apartheid government was amongst the fatal strategic miscalculation which backfired, as this precipitated the swelling of ranks of the People's Army, Umkhonto weSizwe, by young militants in order to challenge the myth of military invisibility of the apartheid security forces. As we traverse the order's journey of reconstruction and development, will forever be indebted to many of these young gallant fighters, the likes of Solomon Mahlangu, Bani Molokwane, Andrew Zondo, Benjamin Muloise, Ting Masango, David Potsani, Jabu Makhura, Sibongile Mkhabela, Thandi Modise, Thenjiwe Mtinjo, and many others. It is against this background that for us in the ANC, this debate on the Constitution is the celebration of the collective heritage of the heroic struggles of our people against the inhuman and racist system of white majority domination. It is also a celebration of a critical reflection on the collective identity and shared vision of the future that we seek to build. As some parts of the preamble of the Constitution articulates, as honorable members have cited. Honorable Chairperson, history is replete with evidence about how our Constitution is not just an outcome of boardroom declaration, but born out of sweat and toil of blood of our people to build a better future. This is aptly captured by the late Nelson Mandela in his testimony before the apartheid court during the historic Rivonia trial, when he said, and I quote, "During my lifetime, I've dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have a nation and I fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die," close quote. History is recorded with many of those who contributed towards this, like George Bizos. Unlike the apartheid white minority establishment parties, whose remnants are still with us today, the ANC vision on the Constitution was shaped by the voices of the masses of the people, the workers, women, youth, rural and urban poor, united in diversity, who assembled in that historic conference of the democratic future in 1989, attended by more than 4,000 delegates from the diverse political organizations in this country. The conference, organized by the then United Democratic Front, South African Council of Churches and Black Consciousness Movement, adopted the 1989 ANC constitutional guidelines. It also adopted a program of rolling mass action to force apartheid government to release political prisoners and ban the African National Congress and other political organizations. To this end, we lower our banners in fitting memories of those who were mowed down by the apartheid bullets in Bisho in 1992, those massacred in the hostels and trains, Johannesburg and the East Rand, as many others who laid down their lives on duty in the line of duty to defeat the white minority racist apartheid regime. It is no secret that the callous murder of one of our own, the late Secretary General of the South African Communist Party, Comrade Chris Hani, also backfired badly to the apartheid government. They thought that by killing Comrade Chris, they were silencing our people. Instead of that, his killing fueled the proliferation of militant and death-defying struggles in demand of the announcement of the election dates for the non-racial, non-sexist, and one person, one vote on a common voters roll. If there is any organization whose vision and values are consistent with the fundamental vision and values of our Constitution, it is none but the African National Congress. There is no doubt that the Constitution of South Africa gives concrete articulation to the fundamental values of the Freedom Charter, the Women's Charter, the 1989 ANC Constitutional Guidelines, and the 1992 Ready to Govern policy document. Key to the function of the Constitution is to outline the architecture and configuration of the state, the system of governance, structures of governance, and fundamental values and principles that regulate the exercise of public authority. This enjoins us, as this august House, born out of the Constitution, to also be self-critical about ourselves as we debate the Constitution as part of the discourse about fundamental change and transformation. Chairperson, the very first clause of the Constitution clearly defines South Africa as one sovereign democratic state. The Constitution goes further of government as national, provincial, and local sphere of government, which are distinctive, interdependent, and interrelated. Chapter 3 of the Constitution outlines further the fundamental principle that should underscore the cooperation and interrelation between three spheres of government. Accordingly, the Constitution locates this august House, the National Council of Provinces, at the cutting edge of cooperative governance and intergovernmental relations. According to the NC submission to Constitutional Assembly 1995, the core mandate of this House is to integrate our system of provincial and local government into the national policy architect. This it does by participating in the national legislative process and by providing a national forum for public consideration of issues that affect provinces. The three key ways that characterize the relationship between our three spheres of government, which are distinctive, interdependent, and interrelated. This presupposes different roles and powers, interdependence, and necessity to interrelate to persuade in pursuance of the national development agenda, local community development, and the consolidation of our democracy. Section 100 on the national intervention in provincial administration and 139 on provincial intervention in municipal administration presupposes the hierarchical power relations between these three spheres and locates NCOP as the final arbiter in this intervention to ensure indivisibility of the South African democratic state. The Constitution further enjoins all legislative bodies to ensure fair representation and participation of minority parties represented in its legislature in their proceedings and committees. The provincial legislatures are not exempted from this obligation. Chair, we have observed with concern that some of the legislatures consistently ignore the provision in the designation of special delegates to the NCOP, whilst other provinces are excelling in this regard. A brief survey of literature reveals that as this August House reached the coming of age, there is still a long way towards defining its identity and role distinct from the National Assembly. The poor articulation of the distinct role and positioning of the House as the voice of provinces in the national policy discourse has attracted some negative comments in the public arena. Some have gone to the extent of concluding that this House has no value and relevance in our constitutional democracy, but a wasteful duplication of National Assembly. According to the Independent Panel on Assessment of Parliament dated 2006, NCOP has not effectively fulfilled its constitutional mandate, but has more often duplicated some areas in the National Assembly. The supreme test of the relevance and value of our House cannot be measured by the number of legislation it passes, neither the number of meetings it convenes, but the capacity and rigor with which it places the provincial and local government issues at the cutting edge of national policy discourse. Key to this are two critical indicators. First, number and quality of intervention it makes to trigger the decisions, the decisive and meaningful intervention of national government in the province and local government, in line with Section 154 of the Constitution. Secondly, the extent to which it forges cooperation between the three spheres of government in pursuance of national development agenda. I must say that the NCOP is beginning to be assertive, and also elements of brilliance are emerging, which we should sustain. This call for continuous and critical reflection on the positioning and repositioning of this House in line with its core constitutional mandate. At the core of this critical reflection should be an honest fundamental rethink about two interrelated critical questions. First, whether we are doing justice in terms of integrating provincial and local government systems in the national policy discourse. And secondly, whether in the manner in which we have continued to define our scope and focus is not too broad to overstretch us. Chair, I'm raising this because although the provincial interest is not defined in the Constitution, it cannot be defined outside the context of the core fundamental or rather core functional areas of provinces as articulated in Schedule 4 of the Constitution. We raise these issues not for own sake, but to remind each other about mission of this House. Contrary to what some would want us to believe, there is no such thing as autonomous sphere in the vocabulary of the Constitution. Honorable members, as we may be aware, the debate takes place within the global context of the resurgence of the demon of racism in various parts of the world, including in our own country. Interestingly, this finds concrete expression within our body politic, among others. The deepening polarization of race discourse within the ranks of official opposition, particularly the Democratic Alliance. Unlike some parties that deny race as a decisive factor that has and continue to define unequal socio-economic power relation. For the ANC, race and gender are at the core of the unequal power relations in our society. As we debate today, the commanding heights of the economy in this country are still in the hands of the few male. The commanding heights, okay, rather, let me say this. As we debate today, the commanding heights of our economy in this country are still in the hands of the few male-dominated white elites. The DA and its stepchildren led by Vhembe, Mashaba, and Musina tell us that to redress these imbalances, we must adopt the failed orthodoxy of market fundamentalism with the slogan of equal opportunities for all. For them, the persistence of unequal socio-economic power relations is God-ordained and not an outcome of centuries of exclusion of the indigenous majority and women, the Blacks and Africans in particular, from the mainstream of economy. They tell us that accumulation of wealth by male white elites is God-ordained and not. They tell us that the accumulation of wealth is. They tell us that accumulation of wealth of elites is ordained and not due to the structural exclusion of the vast indigenous majority and their exclusion, super exploitation, and the triple oppression of Black women. It is against this background that the ANC will never be apologetic about our fundamental economic policy choices like preferential policy, the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, National Minimum Wage, broad-based Black economic empowerment. These policies and other radical economic policies have their genesis in the Freedom Charter, and even the 1969 ANC strategy and tactics document cites very important areas of development that needs to take place. To surrender to the empty noises against these radical economic policy choices is to betray the very fundamental values of redress, equity, and social justice articulated in the Constitution. The position by the Democratic Alliance to defend and advance white privilege is a practical demonstration of how this party is still clinging to the umbilical cord of white supremacy whilst using Black majority as voting fodder. When we talk about fundamental economic redress in favor of the historically marginalized, oppressed and exploited, they are quick to evoke the old apartheid as scare propaganda tactics, to mobilize the narrow racist sentiments against fundamental change from amongst the white sections of our electorate. At this, sorry, Chair.
Honorable Chief, your time is up. We just have 1 minute. So
just to conclude in 1 minute, allow me to challenge the political parties represented in this House, Chairperson, to stop the hypocrisy of romanticizing the Constitution selectively, not out of genuine commitment and loyalty, but as an opportunist endeavor to attack the African National Congress for narrow political point scoring. Whilst they are West constitutional delinquents, the collapse of Tshwane Municipality is a case in point. I thank you, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chief Whip. We will call now on Honorable Khosho, the Northwest MEC for Finance. And after that, the Chairperson is back on the platform. You will take over the chairing of the House. Honorable Khosho, you will be now on the platform.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Chair, the Chairperson of the NCOP, members, special and permanent delegates in the NCOP, delegates who are also debating today, the Minister, Minister Lamula. Good afternoon, Madam Deputy Chair. Madam Deputy Chair, the NCOP's theme for this year's International Day of Democracy is reaffirming the values and principles of our constitutional democracy. The International Day of Democracy is an opportunity to remember that democracy is about the people. Democracy is built on inclusion. Democracy is built on inclusion, equal treatment, and participation, and it is a fundamental building block for peace, sustainable development, and human rights. Madam Deputy Chair, in observation of September as Heritage Month, allow me to appreciate our collective cultural heritage as Africans, as the similarities in our cultural values and identities have bred African Renaissance and Pan-Africanism. The two ideas have served as an instrument in Africans' rights for freedom and human rights. These ideas have demonstrated that being an African is not necessarily bound by borders, but rests on an identity which can be recognized through characteristics, common stories, and the desire for freedom, equality, and independence. The recent campaign of the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement by Africans around the globe gives precedence to this statement. Our cultural heritage forms common ground for African people. The ideal of shared common history and purpose is an investment which fosters bonds of solidarity among African people. This is why we observe this month and continue to recognize the International Democracy Day in South Africa. Madam Deputy Chair, democracy can only arise in a society where there is similarity of political, economic, and social dispensation ideas. It is for this reason that the elements of democracy resonate well with the 1953 annual conference that was held in Queenstown, where Chief Albert Lucille said, I quote, "We are prepared to cooperate fully based on equality with any national political party or organization, provided we share common objectives and common methods of achieving our aims. Cooperation will also always be based on equality and mutual respect for the individual identity of our organization," close quote. The African National Congress has been striving to champion socio-economic transformation for years through a democratic process that has been the birthchild of African life for centuries. The ANC of Pixika, Isaka Tsemi, and several organic intellectuals such as Chief Moshweshwe, Chief Sikukuni, Reverend Mashabane, Datesol Msani, and hundreds of others met in Bloemfontein to democratically elect John Langalibalile Dube, our then president, to be the first president of the organization. For more than 82 years before the dawn of democracy in our country, the ANC stood firm in their belief and vision of the future of South Africa, with a desire for a system of democracy that was based on universal suffrage, public participation, non-racial society, non-sexist society that guarantees that all are equal and there is mutual respect while restoring the dignity of those who were previously oppressed and disadvantaged. Madam Deputy Chair, later in the years during the presidential leadership of Dr. Kuma, a conference that included all African leaders was called to draw up a Bill of Rights, and in 1949, the ANC National Conference adopted the program of action which set out activities by which the Bill of Rights contained African claims. We therefore ought to agree that fundamentals of the current constitution of the Republic of South Africa have their footprints on the continent, and in particular in the ANC with the Bill of, with the ANC Bill of Rights as a cornerstone of democracy that has always maintained the values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. The Freedom Charter has always been a daily scripture of the members of the ANC, who strongly declared through it that no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people, that the people have been robbed of their birthright of land, liberty, and peace by a form of government founded on injustice and inequality. The Freedom Charter assures South Africans that it is only a democratic state based on the will of all the people that can secure their birthright without distinction of color, race, sex, and belief. Madam Deputy Chair, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which has maintained what the Freedom Charter espouses. The ANC conferences also did the same year of 1949, assured the rights and equality of our people. It has provided South Africans and those who live within the jurisdiction of this country with the cemented values based on the Bill of Rights, the Chapter 9 institutions, the judicial authority that assured us the supremacy of the Constitution and are binding to all legislative and executive organs of the state at all levels. The Bill of Rights guarantees what the Freedom Charter has always addressed in terms of the rights to equality, right to life, freedom and security of the people, right to religion, belief and opinion, freedom of expression and movement amongst many of us. Madam Deputy Chair, as an ideal, democracy aims essentially to preserve and promote the dignity and fundamental rights of the individual, to achieve social justice, foster the economic and social development of the community, strengthen the cohesion of society, and enhance national tranquility, as well as to create a climate that is favorable for international peace. As a form of government, democracy is the best way of achieving this objective. These objectives. It is also the only political system that has the capacity for self-correction. Madam Deputy Chair, the achievement of democracy is supposed to assume a genuine partnership between men and women in the conduct of the affairs of society, in which they work in equally and complementary, drawing mutual enrichment from their differences. However, the persistent gender pay gaps and disproportionate assumption of leadership roles in their workplace indicate that democracy is weakened in this regard. A democratic state must ensure that the processes by which power is acceded to wielders and alternates to allow for free political competition and are the products of open, free, non-discriminatory participation by the people. Also exercise the rule of law in both the letter and in the spirit. Madam Deputy Chair, democracy is founded on the priority of the law and the exercise of human rights. In a democratic state, no one is above the law and all are equal before the law. Our country is practicing this and respecting judicial independence. This principle was evidence when several civil rights groups took the government to task after the lockdown severely restricted freedom of movement, closed all but essential companies and schools, banned sale of alcohol and tobacco, and introduced a nighttime curfew between 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. Even though some liberties were infringed upon, care has been taken to ensure that political rights and rights to freedom of expression and association are not restricted. Madam Deputy Chair, this is important and gives value to citizens' public participation, like when they exercise their rights in terms of the Constitution to vote and do so in secret. This right is an important right that allows every citizen to voice through ballot paper to vote for the party of their choices. We therefore encourage every citizen to take next year's local government elections as another step to demonstrate democracy and enjoy it by casting their vote in the next coming local government elections in 2021 and vote secretly for the party of their choice. I thank you, Madam Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Chairperson, we'll give over to you whilst we call Honorable Schaefer from the Western Cape, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can I start?
Deputy Chair. We'll move to the next speaker, Honorable B. Scaffer, Western Cape Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. Honorable House Chairperson of the NCOP, MECs, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen. The nationwide lockdown is an extraordinary moment in South Africa's history and the world at large. Indeed, there is no doubt that the history books will be rewritten, highlighting COVID-19 as a hallmark challenge of our lifetime and question the decline of democracies across the world. Ideology, they say, is a requisite of any society, but COVID-19 has effectively presented governments the world over with essentially two choices. On the one hand, to take citizens into their confidence, openly share the data, and partner with its citizens to collectively defeat the pandemic, while on the other, government resorting to the implementation of draconian relaxations and regulations in order to instate a culture of fear through a centralized mechanism. As Yuval Harari, the author of 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, rightly indicates, both these paths set a trajectory for years to come. The decisions taken during this time will have consequences for the future. This will not escape us, and many of this generation of leaders, I believe, will go down in history with a cloud over their heads. This is a tale of two tomorrows. As we recognize this day of international democracy, the question we must ask is, what path has South Africa chosen during this pandemic, and what will be the outcome of its actions post-COVID-19? Which path did we choose? The one where citizens were taken into their confidence, or the one which Yuval Harari describes as one of a lack of trust between citizen and government, where the individual and public at large cannot and must not be trusted to make their own decisions, thus leaving a door wide open for the authoritarian state to rear its head, and rear its ugly head it certainly has. 24 international organizations recently called for the global Magnitsky sanctions on corruption and human rights abuse during COVID-19. Just last year, this very global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act was implemented against the Guptas for gross state capture in South Africa. To date, however, not a single individual listed has been prosecuted or held accountable by this country. Further evidence of Harari's mistrust scenario and the rise of the authoritarian state. It's caused an absolute furore across various platforms, including the presidency's office, after writing to the president to express anxiety about the risk of pandemic crisis measures and the functioning of the National Coronavirus Command Council, undermining South Africa's constitutional democracy. Further evidence of the growing mistrust among civic society. When the National Trade and Industry Minister Ibrahim Patel gazetted regulations regarding the sale of clothing under South Africa's level 4 lockdown, we saw the literal and figurative entry of our government into our closets. Quite rightly, this sparked widespread outrage. It provided the nation with a sobering moment of clarity. What had become of our constitutional democracy? You see, Chairperson, the choice between privacy and our health is a false dilemma. It is utterly misleading to believe that the only way to save our health is to give up our privacy rights, allowing the government to tell us when and where it is appropriate to wear a simple T-shirt. This once again shows the growing trajectory of the authoritarian state in South Africa. More damning, I believe, was a statement by Trevor Manuel a few months ago on Fin24 stating, and I quote, "History casts a long shadow over what we do. The big challenge that confronts us is in South Africa is what we do now with almost 3 decades that were wasted." In March this year, Corruption Watch publicly warned South Africa of the emergency procurement measures and the risk of the 500 billion rand stimulus package to looting. They were so right. Mistrust was not an overreaction by society, Chairperson, because the signs were there. The same people are still there. As Business Tech reported, deals believed to be worth it more than 2.2 billion rand involving emergency purchases of personal protective equipment are at the center of an investigation, with 90 companies that received contracts from the Gauteng Health Department under the spotlight. Chairperson, I call on the United States to relook at the global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act of state looting under COVID-19 in South Africa, which has seen the suffering of millions of South Africans as a result. The president recently lambasted the corruption and called the ANC to publicly disassociate itself from anyone, whether business, donor, supporter, or member, accused of corruption or reported to be involved in corruption. Chairperson, the public laughed. It would mean a large part of government, including those cabinet members allegedly accused in the media, to step aside. Let's not forget there is an election coming up, and to stay in power, you need to make deals. Most culprits still remain in office, continuing the cycle of looting the public coffers. Corruption is, as Harari states, now so deeply entrenched and endemic in every cornerstone of South Africa's government. And to prove my point of a rising authoritarian state, the red flags are there for us to see. Since 2006, Chairperson, South Africa's democracy index has steadily declined from 7.910 to 7.240 in 2019. It has remained in the category of a flawed democracy, and I believe will continue to decline as the corruption and centralization of power continues in this country. In the southern part of South Africa, we see the stark ideological difference in governance that has brought vastly different results to the one I've described above. A government that led transparently, handled the people with dignity, and continued on a weekly basis kept the public informed along the way. The DA-led Western Cape has understood the ramifications of the two scenarios as outlined by Harari. We recognize that history would judge us for our actions during this pandemic. And so from an oversight perspective, the Western Cape Provincial Parliament set up an ad hoc committee chaired by the Chief Whip to oversee the spending of the Western Cape government. This is in stark contrast to the National Assembly, which is yet to carry out their mandate of oversight and to do the same. In the recent latest Citizen Satisfaction Index report, the city of Cape Town is named most trusted in South Africa, 7th time in a row. The report states, and I quote, "It is notable that when you look at the sentiment analysis in the latest South African CSI index, with the exception of Cape Town, sentiment on every single measure is negative on the level of service experienced by citizens in the rest of South Africa." This once again confirms Yuval Harari's scenario of a growing mistrust of South African people and the decline of our democracy to deliver to all its people. And while we are told what to wear by the national government, in the Western Cape, we rather use technology and build hospitals of hope to bring dignity to the lives of our people. The Western Cape government's data dashboard, developed by a team in the Department of Health, was built to share reliable data with members of the public that they could use to keep themselves informed. This dashboard was shortlisted in the New Generation Social and Digital Media Awards in the category Best Use of Technical Innovation During this Pandemic. Chairperson, this is the tale of two tomorrows, the one in stark contrast to the other, both existing within the borders of the country, but producing vastly different outcomes. One that builds on democratic principles of transparency and accountability, while the other building on fear and mistrust. Chairperson, let us reflect our paths to the two tomorrows on this day of international democracy. As Ban Ki-moon says, future generations will judge us harshly if we fail to uphold our moral and historical responsibilities. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Honorable Nana. Honorable Nana.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, Minister of Correctional Services and Justice, Honorable Lamola, honorable members, fellow South Africans. Open quote. We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this constitution as a supreme law of the Republic to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundation for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person and build a united and democratic South Africa, able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. Close quote. Honorable Person, I thought it was necessary for me to preface my speech today by referring to the preamble of our Supreme Law. And I know Honorable Dango and a little bit from the Chief Whip, they have also referred to this preamble. I'm doing so not because I can, but as a reminder to all of us that we have a duty and we owe it to our Constitution. Our founding fathers saw it fit to bequeath us a constitutional democratic state with the Bill of Rights as the cornerstone of democracy in our country. It enshrines the rights of all people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. The preamble calls on all of us never to forget our past so as to learn from it and not commit such transgressions in the future. Because a nation that is not alive to its history, quite frankly, does not know where it is going. What is just as important to me is that as the nation, we should respect those who have worked to build and develop what today is called the Republic of South Africa, regardless of the era. Today, as we join the nations of the world in observing International Democracy Day, it is significant for our country's young and fledgling democracy because it is the day that provides us an opportunity to take stock of the road that we have traveled, but also it highlights the values of freedom and respect for human rights as an essential element of democracy. As we do so, honorable members, we should never look away when a despot in Zimbabwe arbitrarily jails journalists for having spoken out. We should never turn our backs when the leader of the opposition in Zimbabwe is jailed based on frivolous charges of high treason. And we should never be quiet or adopt silent diplomacy when the people of Zimbabwe disappear without trace. Honorable Chairperson, a road to dictatorship starts with the destruction of constitutional infrastructure, erosion of democratic values, and disrespect of the rule of law. Today in our country, we have pseudo-fascists who incite violence publicly by ordering their supporters to go to war and attack. We all know it is a criminal offense to incite violence. But to me, what is most concerning is that these renegades seem to take law unto themselves and they do as they please without consequences. Lack of action against this kind of behavior makes me believe that indeed we are all equal, but others are more equal than others. What is good for the goose surely should be good for the gander. To be clear, honorable members, I must state for the record that since my boyhood, I chose to fight against racial prejudice and all its manifestations. But the rise of narrow African nationalism in our country should be of great concern to all of us. These days, there are those who seek to divide us based on the pigmentation of our skins. We must reject these overtures with contempt because our constitution directs us that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. I would therefore prefer to leave my children, Mkhangolo and Lunga, a South Africa in which they will see themselves as equals with their peers of other races and with equal opportunities. As we observe this important day, we should also take a moment to recommit ourselves to the prescripts of our constitution and democratic values and never allow sideshows to distract us in building one South Africa for all. Honorable Mohaye, in his final stages of his presentation, he mentioned that the Democratic Alliance is a party of white supremacists. I can assure you, Chief Whip, that is far from the truth. I'm trying to be very modest. People of South Africa are these days voting the DA in their numbers, regardless of the color of their skin, because they can see through the lies that the DA is a party for white supremacists. In fact, they can see wherever the DA governs, we do make a difference, regardless of who you are, where you come from, your background, and the color of your skin. So South Africans will never be fooled by your rhetoric anymore. I thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you very much. We now move on to Honorable Karim. Honorable Karim.
Thank you, Chairperson. Comrade Chair, Comrade Minister, colleagues and friends, and other comrades. I think the UN International Day of Democracy has particular resonance this year because of the extent to which governments in many parts of the world, including those in established democracies, have been eroding key aspects of democracy in the fight against the COVID pandemic. Of course, COVID-19 has created exceptional and unprecedented circumstances and has upended the world. And governments have had to act swiftly and decisively, with scientists playing a far more prominent role in decisions than they normally do, and parliaments and civil society not being involved in decision-making as they normally are. But in many cases, governments have gone beyond what's been necessary, some acting in an authoritarian or very top-down manner, marginalizing parliaments, other state institutions, and civil society. In some cases, governments were stealthily or otherwise moving in this direction before COVID anyway. Just think of what was happening before COVID and what's been happening since in countries like, let's say, Bolsonaro's Brazil, Trump's America, Putin's Russia, Orban's Hungary, Morawiecki's Poland, and of course, Modi's India. Horrifically, as he trails Biden in the election polls, Trump, to bolster chances of winning the US elections, is putting scientists under immense pressure to deliver a vaccine before the elections so that he, without a single course in science, let alone epidemiology, or let alone any substantial degree, could claim personal victory in finding the much sought after vaccine. Against this background, what's happened in this country since COVID, unlike what the DA says, the government has performed very well and been fairly open and transparent, and its covert work subject to scrutiny of Parliament and the courts. COVID-19 has put governments to the test like nothing else since the last two world wars. And our government, its faults notwithstanding, has passed the test admirably. In any case, thanks to our constitution, the very subject at issue in today's debate, the government has had no choice. Ultimately, the Constitutional Court looms over all of us to ensure that we abide by it. And who gave this country the Constitutional Court, if not mainly the ANC? And who were the vast majority of the Constitutional Court judges identified with before 1994 until they became judges, if not the ANC? And they, very honorable Chairperson, took decisions against the ANC government when they felt it's necessary. Interestingly, the DA goes against the view expressed by, in fact, the World Health Organization repeatedly, that South Africa has done very well in managing COVID-19. And the World Health Organization, against the conspiracy theories that flow from the DA constantly in this House, is not a subcommittee of the ANC. It's not a front organization of the ANC. And the DA has gone to court many, many times and has failed, I think, on almost every, if not every account on their COVID-19 objections. So it's not clear why they're ranting on the way they are this morning. Their approach, ultimately, Chairperson, we know, flows from a very deep individualism and a veneration of the free market above everything else. They focus on race, but what they don't focus on is, they focus on their rejection of race, which I think also betrays their class bias. Because when the ANC talks about race as being important to address, it's not addressing the biology issue. It's not, we recognize that race is a social construct. It's created by society. It is not something, people's positions in society can never be determined by their biology or their gene. So where that is used as a basis to do so, like in apartheid, it actually is a social construct, political engineering. We recognize that that is what it is. However, unless we recognize that while it's a social construct, it has very practical material consequences for people of color, particularly those of the darkest hue, we can never address the issues of non-racialism. We can never overcome the racism of the past and the racism that persists even now. Now, at their very recent policy conference, the DA decided not to acknowledge that race exists. If they're saying it doesn't exist as a social construct, yes, but as a political, it does. And we have to use that to address non-racialism. Otherwise, we'll be a dismal failure. Now, non-racialism doesn't mean color blindness. In fact, it's questionable whether the policy the DA adopted at its conference is consistent with the spirit of the Constitution and maybe even the letter of it. But that's a matter that can be debated elsewhere. Now, the DA complains about Minister Patel, but he has made it very clear that many of those restrictions on what could be sold and what didn't come from him. In fact, he was dealing with the DA's constituency. It was the retail sector that made those proposals. So it's not clear to me why the ANC gets attacked in government without focusing on the decisions of the very private sector, that the very DA that's arguing here against that, the ANC takes into account. We're told of the tale of two tomorrows. But what, DA, about the tale of two todays? What about the horrible past of 2 days? In other words, you cannot address the current issues without recognizing the past we came from and the future towards which we should go to. Once again, the focus of the DA is short-termist. It's blind to the past and unable to see the need for a future. So it focuses on today. And basically, it's defending the interests of a minority. That's what it's doing. One particular minority, but any others who identify with the DA. We are told the DA's membership is growing. Well, the test was the May 2019 elections, and this has been covered repeatedly. They lost the few votes that they even had in places like Soweto and elsewhere in the African townships. Now we are told Africanism is surfacing. Yes, it's of concern to all parties. But who contributes towards that Africanism, if not the DA, by refusing to acknowledge that race has practical, consequential meaning today, even though we all want to move away from it? The only way we can move away from race and recognize it for its social construct is to address it for its practical consequences in the current era. Now the DA goes on about harping on the scorpions. Yes, there were mistakes made. The ANC itself has acknowledged it. The minister is dealing with a new fusion center. Now, it's not clear to me exactly how that fusion center will be constituted, but hopefully, Chairperson, we're not going to have another politicized scorpions. We do not need another politicized scorpions any more than we've needed a politicized hawks. Hopefully this new fusion center minister and others dealing with this matter in the Justice Committee, hopefully it'll come to us. And finally, on this matter, it's not a question, Chairperson, of just the government deciding what the fusion center should be. Parliament needs to be involved, and so does civil society. We don't want a politicized scorpions. We don't want a politicized hawks. We want a powerful, independent, multidisciplinary, integrated methodological approach. And those issues were discussed in 2008. If the DA really cares, there is an article written by one of us who was involved in the 2008 disbanding of the scorpions in Parliament. And that article addresses those issues. It may be of some use to those who are shaping the new fusion center, and we can discuss those issues if people care offline. On the matter of the Freedom Front, it doesn't bring itself to admit that the interim constitution provided what they wanted, the Volksstaat Council, and the final constitution provided what you might want to call the Cultural Rights Commission in Chapter 9, the Section 185 Commission, to take into account their needs. Yes, he points to our colleague freedom without responsibility. What about the responsibility of the Freedom Front? To educate their membership, their supporters, those who vote for them, on the need to treat African workers on their farms humanely. What about their responsibility to ensure that their constituency is dragged by the scruff of the neck, if need be, towards a non-racial society? He talks about economic poor and economic poverty and spiritual poverty. There's a lot I can say, but I'm worried about my time and I haven't monitored myself, which I intended to, Chairperson. I've got 14 minutes, but I can see by my notes, I'm not getting anywhere.
3 minutes.
So I'm in a rush. Sorry, Chairperson.
You have about 3 minutes.
My dear. Okay, fine. Everybody has their times and we can move on. Okay, so yes, you know, the Freedom Front colleague says this is not a democracy. Yet he speaks so openly. I have no doubt that since he's spoken, the security police haven't pounced on his house, descended on it, and, you know, he's not in detention without trial and so on, which his predecessor parties. Whereas the EFF, of course, we agree with the EFF, the ANC does. Look at our conference decisions. Go back to Morogoro, that you cannot have political freedom without economic freedom, which is why we insisted on not just first generation political rights, but economic rights too. The right to housing, to health services, to education, and so on, so on. Most of that, I don't think the ANC disagrees with the EFF, though it does puzzle me, since we're talking about democracy, Chairperson. As I know democracy, and as most of us know democracy, it's based essentially on the number of votes you get. So if I recall correctly, the EFF got 10.25% of the vote in the last elections. Yet the EFF speaks about the majority. It keeps saying we speak for most South Africans, etc. I'm not clear how that's possible. Then on the issue of you know, the president's case, that is an internal party political matter. It's not necessarily related to the Constitution. The president himself says, let the court decision be made. Nobody in the ANC supports, though it is happening, and we've admitted to it, nobody wants the use of funds to determine votes in our party. I will not focus right now on how the EFF conducts its party, what sort of elections they have. There isn't the time, and I know I'm going to be stopped, so, you know, shortly, and points of order will be raised. What I will say is that the fact is that we in the ANC were mainly responsible against the opposition of the DA, Democratic Party as it was then, and the National Party, NNP as it was then, to provide for 3-generation rights. So the first are political rights. The second are essentially rights around the right to work, essentially, and other jobs. And the Constitutional Court, led by mainly judges, almost all of the judges, were in some or other way identified with the ANC prior to 19, they argued that you cannot, Chairperson, you cannot have political rights without socio-economic rights. The Chief Justice Albie Sachs had a lot to say about that, and I have a wonderful quotation from him, which unfortunately there isn't the time to read. But if you look at the DA and the Freedom Front, for the Freedom Front, we also provided
time is up.
Rights, the right to identify. Finally, if we really respect Advocate Bezos, let's act on his legacy. He wanted both political rights and economic rights. And let's address economic inequality, DA, Freedom Front. Otherwise, the political rights are meaningless. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Honorable Dango, who will close the debate. Honorable Dango.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much to all the speakers that contributed to this debate. In fact, no speaker disagreed with ANC policy. Rather, from their own mistaken perspective, they criticized the non-delivery of the ANC on its own policy mandates. Chairperson, you know, the Deputy Speaker of the Western Cape speaks about 500 billion. Now, this 500 billion story is doing the round all the time, when in fact is not fact. 200 billion of that, for example, was provided as guarantees to banks and not cash. to advance to their own clients. Now, they advanced 13.5 billion, but did not advance the rest. But the story goes on 500 billion. So if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Secondly, the Deputy Speaker of the Western Cape invited the US to intervene in South Africa. Now, I lived in Libya at the beginning of the uprising. There were no divisions there. But what then happened was that on the basis of territorial control of the oil and the oil resources, and they suffer from the curse of resources, they are now split, and you now have a failed state called Libya, which was supported by NATO uprisings. Now, we should be vigilant. As a country, we suffer from the same curse. We suffer from the curse of resources. And for those who've never faced bunker bust booms and hellfire missiles, I think they should visit places like Syria or Libya and see what the population is actually suffering from interference invited by others. The ANC political-led alliance is probably the best place to manage narrow nationalism, tribalism, and other possible divisions. And our non-racism was born out of struggle, not in some back room. It was born from the Doctors' Pact. It was born in the struggles that brought people together, the workers' struggles. Even the faith communities were part of that. They had their own conference prior to the adoption of the Constitution, and a lot of the Bill of Rights that we do have come from that particular conference. With that, Chairperson, I want to thank you very much and thank the speakers. This debate, I think, from my perspective, is concluded. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Dango, Honorable Delegates. That concludes the business for the day. The House is now adjourned. Thank you very much.